Welcome everyone to a new episode of 99 zu 1, another English-speaking episode today because I have two very interesting guests. I have the two filmmakers, Antony Loewenstein and Dan Davies, who made a movie called Germany's Israel Obsession, which is available or was premiered on Al Jazeera English and is now, as far as I know, also available on YouTube. And I will just quickly, directly show the trailer and so that we can see what we are talking about.
Is Germany's vow to never repeat its darkest past, creating a dark future?
I feel I don't belong into this society.
I definitely don't feel safe in Germany anymore.
A Jewish journalist returns to his ancestral home where his family were victims of the Holocaust to investigate and uncover a new hatred.
As an Israeli and a Jew, that I'm not allowed to say stop the genocide in Gaza.
Germany's Israel Obsession, coming soon on Al Jazeera.
Very nice. We have some very well-known guests here. We had Melanie, we had Iris, we also had them on the podcast. Today we have the two filmmakers behind this documentary, Antony Loewenstein and Dan Davies. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. I would just quickly say a paragraph about the two of you. Antony Loewenstein is an Australian-German investigative journalist, author and filmmaker, co-founder of Declassified Australia. He has reported globally, including South Sudan, East Jerusalem. His acclaimed works include After Zionism, which was published in 2024, co-edited with Ahmed Moore, and the Palestine Laboratory documentary 2025 in Al Jazeera English. His critical journalism on Israel-Palestine is featured in the film Not in My Name, which was also issued in 2025, and he writes for the New York Times, The Guardian, Al Jazeera English, and more. Did I miss anything important?
That sounds pretty good to me. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Dan Davies is an award-winning producer and director whose documentaries have aired on the BBC Channel 4, PBS, Al Jazeera English, and more. He has created and overseen series including Rebel Architecture, Rebel Geeks, and Europe's Forbidden Colony. His investigative productions span from India's thriving scam industry to midwives under pressure. In 2025, he produced and directed Al Jazeera's two-part documentary based on Antony Loewenstein's The Palestine Laboratory. Did I miss anything with you?
No, that's very comprehensive. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Let's just get right into it. I watched the movie yesterday, really liked it, thought it was very thought-provoking, yet also emotional. So let's start with Antony. You're actually a German citizen, which is also part of the movie. Can you tell a little bit more about your family history and why you came to producing this movie?
So in short, I was born in Australia in 1974, so I'm an Australian citizen as well. But my family, on my father's side, was from Germany. They lived in Dresden before World War II. In 1933, like most Jews, their lives changed irreversibly, and many of them were killed in the Holocaust. The ones who got out, who escaped, left in 1939 and got to Australia, to the UK, to the US and elsewhere. And some listeners or viewers may be aware of this or may not, that after the war, World War II, Germany, as one way to atone for their crimes, allowed Jews who had lost their citizenship to have it returned. And what I mean by that is when my grandparents left Germany in 1939, the Germans said they were not citizens, now, which of course was nonsense. They were, but Germany didn't recognize Jews as citizens. Fast forward to after the war, and from the 1950s, Germany offered this to Jews, and the majority of Jews in the world said to Germany to bugger off. Frankly, they had no interest in doing it because their view, including in my family, was why do we want to be a German citizen after what Germans did to us? This changed in the last 25 years or so, in short, and I often asked my father and grandfather, I wanted to become a citizen, partly to have an EU passport, it could be useful. And secondly, I saw it as a way to close a historical circle, some kind of atonement, I guess, of the Germans. So in 2011, after lots of paperwork and bureaucracy, I became a citizen. I have a passport, and I got the passport here in Sydney, where I'm based in Australia. And I remember I went to the consulate here and met the official there, and I remember actually being quite teary, which might sound weird. I don't really feel then or now, do I feel German? I mean, I feel a connection to Germany, and the film talks about this, of course, like a lot of Jews do. Often historical connection with Germany has been incredibly negative for obvious reasons. But I think that's changing to an extent. So yes, I guess I am a German citizen, but I live in Australia, and I've spent time in Berlin and Germany over the years, but I don't live there at the moment.
Hmm. I got that right. In the beginning of the movie, we see the stumble stones for your family being set up.
Indeed.
I found that very, very touching. Personally, yeah, you first, please.
No, I was just going to say, for those who don't know, Stumbling Stones was something that a German artist started a number of years ago, which essentially is a way to commemorate the Jews and others who were murdered by the Nazis in World War II and before. And they are essentially small little gold stones that are really put into the pavement outside a building, a home. So for my family, it was my great-grandparents who were living in Dresden before the war, who ended up being sent to Auschwitz and were murdered there in 1943. And fast forward decades, and about in May this year, when Dan and I were in Germany, we sort of partly tied the trip around this event, I guess, which was in Dresden. They laid down these stumbling stones. There was a little ceremony. There was some quite moving Jewish music. And we put that in the beginning of the film just to give a sense. I mean, the film itself is not principally about me. I'm in the film. Obviously, I'm the journalist doing the reporting, but that just gives people a bit of an idea that there is I would say, more critical Jewish voice in relation to particularly what Germany is doing in relation to Israel and Palestine.
Let's get back to that quickly, but first I want to ask Dan, what was your role in the creation of the movie?
So, Antony, after we did the Palestine laboratory, Antony said, "Hey, I've got this idea. What about this?" And we talked about it. And after Al Jazeera had said they'd be interested, then what we do is we have a team of assistant producers who look into the whole field and find the best contributors. Now, it may seem obvious to you to interview Iris and Udi and Deborah, but for us, coming from Australia and Britain, we had to learn about the whole scene, find all those amazing Palestinian people, arrange it all. And then as director, I guess my main role is once we get all the material back, we've done between 50 and 90-minute interview with everyone in that film. And it's actually taking things out so that the film has a story. We could have pretty much done the whole thing with any single one person. We covered all the topics. Antony did amazing interviews. They could each be a podcast. But how do we make it into a story that has a beginning, middle, end, that starts with evidence, goes through analysis, builds to a conclusion? That's what we've been beavering away here in London with the editor. So hopefully that works and it's all understandable.
Yes. It is. Can you give us like a quick synopsis? What is this movie about? I mean, the title gives it a little bit away, Germany's Israel obsession, but what is this movie? What is the gist of the movie that you want to convey?
What we're looking at is how Germany's past with Jewish people and then Israel is feeding into how it responds now to those who are critical of what Israel is doing with Palestine. That's the super short, without giving too much away.
You want to add something, Antony?
I'd agree with that. A very pithy one-sentence summary. I think it also, one of the reasons I wanted to make the film, yes, I did approach Dan. I think we may have briefly spoken about it late last year while we were still finishing laboratory, but only really got into it earlier this year when the film was broadcast. One of the things that struck me when I often spoke to people about this question as someone who, although I don't live in Germany now, I certainly follow the German scene, so to speak, what's happening in relation to Palestine, especially since October 7, 2023. And one of the things that I found when I spoke to people in Australia, in the US, UK, Europe, who were pretty much across what was happening in Palestine, knew very little about what was happening in Germany. We know quite a lot about, obviously, the US, because America is a global superpower, and we see what's happening whether Biden was president or Trump. We saw that often in the UK, whether it was Boris Johnson as leader or Keir Starmer, whoever it may be. But I felt like Germany, in my view, before we made the film, and my view has only strengthened since we have released it yesterday, is that it is one of the most repressive Western states against any kind of legitimate Palestinian solidarity. This could be Jewish, Arab, Muslim, Christian, atheist, whatever. Now, Germany is not North Korea. I'm not obviously suggesting that's the case. But as we show in the film, the level of repression against anyone who expresses even the mildest of criticism, I think really is empowering the far right, which I know we'll speak about in Germany, and the willingness of the vast bulk of the political and media establishment in Germany, from, I might add, the right wing, of course, but much of the so-called mainstream left. Not all the left, of course, and we discussed that in the film. There are some on the left, the far left, who are utterly opposed to this, clearly. But much of the so-called mainstream left is wholly supportive of Israel and wholly supportive of these draconian crackdowns. And that has having a deep impact on empowering the far right in Germany. So I wanted to, with Dan, make a film that reflected that, because I see what's happening in Germany. Actually, although it's very unique with German conditions, there are similarities and echoes in the UK, in the US, in Australia, particularly since October 7.
We will get into more detail about this. I just want to give you just a little tidbit just to make you even more, how can I say, surprised about how far this goes, because you say that the left is pretty close to Zionism, etc. I'm from an old school punk rock background, and there are locations in Germany, anarchist squad locations, where you are not allowed to play as a band unless you pledge allegiance to Israel.
Wow. Do you mean as in, for example, if you want to play at a venue, they're going to say, please sign this contract?
No, but if they know that you said something about the topic in the past, like, for example, like, I'm against genocide, they will say, like, but are you with Israel? You know, being against genocide, okay, we take that, but are you with Israel? I remember that I was in a squad having at a gig, and they had an Israeli flag over the bar in a left-wing radical squad, and I was like, wow.
And this is post October 7 or before?
No, it was way before. It's 10 years ago.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, I mean, as you say, and obviously you live there, and we do mention this in the film. Not everything is a post October 7. I mean, the film obviously is mostly about Germany now, but this rot has been there for a long time, and that's a very interesting. I'm sure it's got worse since, by the way.
Kind of. I think that the opposition also got a lot stronger. And for example, Berlin is a migrant city, especially subculturally. That is a healthy thing, because there are a lot of people who do not have the, how can I say, the good old German psychosis about this topic. So that, for example, squads or locations where there are more people from other countries, left-wing people, tend to be more clear-headed about the topic. And I do say this with absolute purpose, clear-headedness, because the other thing is just neurotic to the 10th degree. Which brings me to my first, like, bigger question, is because in the movie you say Germany has learned all the wrong lessons from the Holocaust. And I just want to know, what are all the wrong lessons?
And that's a big question. So I'll make this brief, because obviously there have been books written about this question, including some of the people in the film, like Susan Nyman, who have written books around this question. I mean, the short version is, on the one hand, and we acknowledge this in the film, there's probably no country in the world that has committed a genocide, and there have been others, Rwanda, Cambodia,
Turkey,
and others.
Armenia.
Turkey, indeed, who have tried in some ways to both atone for that, understand that, teach young people the lessons of that. And Germany has done that in some ways for a long time. It wasn't happening in 1946, but it certainly has been happening the last 20, 30 years. And I welcome that. And it's an important however. I think a lot of the deep anti-Palestinianism and anti-Islam and anti-Muslim sentiment that is deeply embedded in German mainstream society, which again is happening in the US as well, in the UK and Australia. And I'm not saying it's, there's one element which is become sadly a Western disease, this anti-Islam phobia, that I think it's about questioning what German identity means. And as we say in the film, in many ways, what the German state and elites are saying is, as they regularly do, we are doing this for Jews. Our support for Israel is to support Jews. And the obvious question is, well, I'm Jewish. Are you doing it for me? And I'm a German citizen, for that matter. Are you doing this for me? Are you doing this, is supporting, even if you don't accept it's genocide in Gaza, which I do, but let's say you think it's just horrible mass killing, which is frankly bad enough, ethnic cleansing. Is that being done in my name to protect me, to protect Jews? Because the great irony is, I don't think we say this in the film, but I've said it elsewhere, is that it's more unsafe to be a Jew in Israel than arguably anywhere else on the planet. And that's been the case for years, if not certainly since October 7, for a range of reasons. So I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Holocaust meant to Germany and Germans. And what they're learning is that when I say they, many in Germany, their identity is now tied up to a far more hardline, ethno-nationalist, Christian, white future, which is not obviously many of the German population's ethnic backgrounds, clearly. But as viewers of this podcast will know, but let me finish on this point. If the AfD gets into power, the main opposition party, which will happen in the coming years, maybe, one of their policies, and they're not unique in this in Europe, is to send back huge amounts of migrants who live in Germany, so-called pre-migration. And under the guise of building a more harmonious Germany, which is frankly code for a white Germany, an ethno-nationalist state, which I would argue is partly why much of the far right admires Israel, which is a Jewish ethno-nationalist state. And that's why so much of the global far right, from Germany to Sweden to France to the US to Australia, who traditionally hate Jews, by the way, suddenly now love Israel. And we talk about this in the film. It's almost like Israel's like a washing machine to launder one's image. I'll leave it at that. Maybe, Dan, you want to add something to that about the German...
Yeah, I think
psychosis.
What Susan Nyman did that was so interesting was she kind of unpacks how this works, and it's like why Germany is globally important in this, because it is to do with the Holocaust. And what she says is that the historiography of the Holocaust, of fascism, has reduced it in the West, and she talks about the East, but we didn't have time for that. It's another thing that we had to take out. In the Western world, was to equate fascism with the murder of 6 million Jews,
which is plainly wrong.
5 or 7 or however many million of homosexuals and Roma and everyone else that is killed. But if you do that, if you reduce fascism to just murdering Jews, then all you have to do to not be a neo-Nazi is say, I support Israel.
Yes, that's the mechanism.
So this was news to me, and I think that's something that I haven't seen elsewhere, and that hopefully is interesting for people to see, because that for me is what's happening inside that washing machine that Israel provides.
This is also why I think one of the main reasons why the AfD, most of the AfD, is fiercely Zionist, because they say we cannot be the neo-Nazis, we're Zionists.
Yes.
I really I think this is a very important point. It's like this because people do not talk about what fascism is, like in a great detail. What were the commonalities of the different forms of fascism in Europe? Maybe even include Japan, because they were also allies in that. So instead of talking about what were they actually about to understand and prevent it, they're like, it was the anti-Semitism, which was in some fascisms more bigger part or a smaller part. And some fascist countries didn't even have anti-Semitic programs per se. Yes.
And it's something I just wanted to add that, and it doesn't ruin it by telling people that we talk about this right at the end of the film. It's not like ruining the ending, but it's just worth saying this, that what's happening in Germany, although again, as I said, it's quite unique to Germany for obvious reasons, every country is unique, but it's mirrored in other places. UK, we talk about Britain, where Dan lives, the US, obviously under Trump, although it was happening when Biden was there too. And I think it's also worth saying that the growing alliance between the global far right and Israel is something that Israel warmly welcomes. This is not as if you have far right fascists in Germany or France saying, Israel, we love you, and Israel saying, go away, don't talk to us, we don't want anything to do with you. In fact, it's the opposite. The current Israeli government, particularly under Netanyahu, although others have this view as well, welcomes this support. They organize events in Israel and Europe with the European far right. Now, as someone who is Jewish, this to me is not just insanity, but deeply, deeply dangerous. It's not recognized enough. Yes. No, I was going to say it's not recognized enough and acknowledged enough, and it needs to be rejected in just the strongest possible terms. It is an insane alliance. It's going to end in, well, tears would be an understatement, put it that way.
Yeah. I remember that they even invited Viktor Orban from Hungary as a guest of honor to Yad Vashem, who distinctly ran, let's just say, at least hinting at anti-Semitic tropes campaign for the own election. So even people who are like pretty openly anti-Semitic are welcomed with open arms into the so-called holy halls of Holocaust memorial in Israel.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's worth saying again, but the film doesn't go into this. This is more in the last film that did with the Palestine Laboratory. Israel has a long history of selling weapons and support to the worst regimes in the world, including the most anti-Semitic regime since World War II. The one that comes to mind right now is Argentina, which was run by a deeply anti-Semitic regime after World War II. It often housed and protected literal Nazis who had fled Europe. And Israel was very happy to support that regime, back that regime, arm that regime. So on one hand, this has been going on for a long time, but it's now in a much, I would say, more prominent form because the far right is in the ascendancy in the US, certainly, and in much of Europe. I don't think it's inevitable that the world is run by the far right next week, but that is a contest of both, I'd say, I fear violence in time and talk. But the idea that I think Israel and pro-Israel supporters say, we don't have many friends in the world and that they like us, we'll take them. And you think, okay, if that's the kind of friend you want to have, then maybe you should question the kind of state that you are.
You talk about, or you talk to various people across the entire political spectrum in the movie, including the anti-Semitism commissioner. If someone is the anti-Semitism commissioner, I kind of hope that they have certain expertise in the topic. So what was your impression of their understanding of anti-Semitism and politics?
Why don't you answer this one, Dan?
No.
Well, I can if you'd like.
I have an illustration, which was we asked a few people for their definition of anti-Semitism. And I think we asked Emily Becker and some of the Palestinians, and they all said, yes, it's hatred of Jews for being Jews. And we asked the anti-Semitism commissioner, and he gave a very long and rambling answer that involved Adorno and wine. And I mean, honestly, I couldn't tell you what his position is. So that was. I feel that Antony should answer this.
Yeah, so there's a scene in the film, and people should obviously watch it, where I meet the anti-Semitism commissioner for Berlin's Jews in one of the major synagogues in the center of Berlin. It's a beautiful old building. And I was interested in his understanding of what he thought the so-called threats were to Jews. And I said to him, all the police statistics and all evidence suggests that the vast, vast bulk of violence and attacks against Jews is coming from the far right. not saying the far left never had commits violence, but in general, overwhelmingly, it's the far right. It's just not even a question. Well, he kind of hedged on that and said, well, yeah, the facts, the police statistics might say that, but actually the real threat that we feel, and he's talking about as Jews, the far left and Muslims. This is what he said. And why did he say that? Well, in relation to, for example, protests for Palestine since October 7, where people say, from river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or they support Gaza, or they want the war to end, or whatever. And his view was, and it's a view, by the way, shared by many Jews in the diaspora. He's not unique. I hear this a lot in the US, UK, Australia, my country, and others, that the so-called pro-Palestine movement is infected with anti-Semitism. It's inherently anti-Semitic, which is complete nonsense, by the way, but that's the argument that's made. And therefore the threat is those so-called pro-Palestine movements. Those who want to end the war in Gaza actually are all secret or often open supporters of Hamas and terrorism and extremism and Islamism. And it's quite clear, as we do show in the film, and anyone watching this in Germany will know this story very well, but those outside will not, is that so much of the hysteria by the German media in the last 2 years now since October 7 is deeply connected to the fact that anyone who supports Palestine is apparently a secret Islamist. That if you say the war in Gaza should end, you are basically Osama bin Laden, that you are essentially ISIS, you are essentially Hamas. Now, we laugh at that, but that sentiment is shared by, I don't want to put words into the anti-Semitism commissioner's mouth, but I'm pretty sure he does think that. He basically said that. Word, not quite those words, but words to that effect. And if you have that worldview, I asked him, do you think these protests for Palestine should be banned? He said basically yes, they should be banned. Now, that takes you on a pretty dark trajectory. If you think that public protest, which is legal, by the way, in a so-called democracy like Germany, should be banned, then I presume he's fine if there are protests in support of Israel, a state that's been credibly accused of genocide. I'm sure that's totally fine in his view, right? So, yeah, I mean, to me and to us, obviously, it's very tortured, deluded thinking, but I know it is not a unique view amongst many in the Jewish diaspora and the global right and far right.
It was very important to us that we hear from him and the AFD and hear it in their own words, and that Antony talked to them, and that we weren't using a YouTube clip or, because they have their position and we wanted to hear it. And I think it's very instructive to hear it direct from him. To hear whatever it was he had to say. I mean, and it's potentially not what you would expect. He says that the far left are arguing in an anti-Semitic way and chasing Jews around Neukölln, around Berlin.
You directly after the segment with the anti-Semitism commissioner, I think directly afterwards, you interview someone from the AfD who also writes for the Junge Freiheit, the far-right newspaper in Germany.
Yes.
And he, while not using the exact same words, he basically says the exact same things. How does that make sense for you? You already touched this a little bit, but maybe go at this again, because I think it's very interesting.
Look, it was important, as Dan said, and we both very much agree with this, that there needed to be a voice of someone like that in the film, because although within Germany, the AfD is probably heard from all the time, outside Germany, I don't think a lot of people really know much about the AfD apart from what they've read. And this is not trying to launder their image. It's pretty clear what we think about the AfD in the film. It's hardly a secret, but I wanted to hear his voice. What did he say? In short, the problem in Germany is Muslims, it's Islam, they're all visitors in this country, meaning Germany, and really they shouldn't be there, and they're ungrateful, and they shouldn't be protesting, and they're causing problems and troubles, and get out. Again, not his words exactly, but I'm paraphrasing. And again, it's not a unique view amongst many. I mean, Dan would know this better than me. Being in the UK, there are currently is a surge in the far right in Britain, and that is exactly what they say there. It's what they say in Australia, the US under Trump, etc. This is on one level not unique to Germany. The difference is, of course, again, there's German characteristics and German history, which is hard to ignore, and the fact that 10 years ago, under Angela Merkel, Germany took in roughly 1 million migrants from Syria, mostly in Afghanistan, and which is a move I personally supported. I would argue that Germany maybe hasn't managed some of that particularly well in the last years, particularly. But when you have, according to public opinion polling in Germany, about a quarter of Germans who support the AfD and could well be a future government of the country, to me and us, it seemed pretty important to hear. Again, he doesn't speak for all the AfD, but I think what he articulated will give people a real taste of generally what they think and what they think German society would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess
he's pretty representative of what they are.
We thought that. Yeah, we thought that. Go on, Dan.
I guess the similarity between the Anti-Semitism Commissioner and the former AfD candidate, we tried really hard to get an actual AfD politician, but they didn't. They all sent us to him. Is representative of kind of what the film is saying in the broader thing, which is that, look, once you start going down this road of repressing things in the name of anti-Semitism and treating people according to their ethnicity or otherness, then you get strange bedfellows. And similarly, D. Specker says you need liberals on the way to authoritarianism, and that seems to be what's happening.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to kind of say one thing on that point, it's a very powerful quote in the film by Saleh, who's a Palestinian man living in Berlin. And again, I'm paraphrasing. He says, I think near the end of the film, all these deeply repressive moves in Germany were not done by the far right. The far right's not in power. It's done by so-called centrist government. I mean, I would argue that's not the case, but so-called centrist or centre-right. They're not the AfD. The AfD is not empowered. I mean, you may disagree. I don't know if you disagree with that, but I mean, this is not to justify their behaviour. It's outrageous and repressive and racist. But what I think he was saying is that if the AfD were actually in power, if they were the chancellor, for example, it's going to be a lot worse. But this is happening before that is happening. So imagine where this could go. And we do have various people saying, well, I could potentially imagine where this could go, where you try to have a Trump-style mass roundup of people from, I mean, we have Deborah Feldman, who is obviously a Jewish American and German, saying that the first people who the AfD would come for are not going to be her. They'd be Muslims and brown people, but they would include people like her because historically the far right and fascists always come for the left, and the intellectuals and the writers and the musicians and the filmmakers and the Jews, of course, ironically, even though they're apparently the best friends of Israel and Jews. So, yeah, I don't feel like our film is alarmist and saying, God, Hitler is back tomorrow. It's not that saying it at all, but it's giving people a sense. And the response, I've been very pleased in the last 24 hours since the film came out. A lot of people who have not been in Germany, a lot of Germans have reacted very well that we've seen, which I've been really happy about. But those not in Germany who have messaged us and put comments on social media have been, I think, pretty shocked at the state of Germany. They just didn't know. But that's been one of the reasons I said before we wanted to make the film.
I just want to add something because you said a center-right government. Before the election in February, that was also like the Green Party actively involved in the government.
I know.
And they were very much gung-ho about the crackdown. I just want to point out a thing that I find particularly interesting is there is this moment in the movie where Jews are described as black sheep. Can you explain this a little bit to us?
I mean, it's on one hand, it can be quite a racist term, which I won't go into, but the short version is that as someone who is Jewish myself, I've often been accused of being a black sheep in the community, so to speak,
Mm,
meaning that the dominant mainstream acceptable view is you support Israel,
mm,
you may have criticisms, but do it privately. Don't air our dirty linen in public. The implication being, which I've been hearing, I've been a journalist for nearly 25 years, that the implication to me has always been bizarre. On the one hand, in many Western countries, Jews are fairly assimilated, they're fairly successful. Not saying that Jews aren't struggling anywhere, of course they are, but in general, Jews are doing relatively well economically, in general. But somehow we're told that they're so weak and vulnerable that they can't hear publicly any criticism of another state, Israel. So I've often been accused of being a black sheep, that somehow I am essentially shitting on my own community. I'm a traitor, basically.
mm,
And the Anti-Semitism Commissioner essentially said, when I asked him, so there are often Jews at these pro-Palestine protests. He says, yeah, but there's always these, he didn't use the word traitor, but that's basically what he obviously thought.
mm,
In the community, they're a fringe. Well, it's a growing fringe, so to speak, because in the US, for example, the film doesn't go into this, but in the US, the Jewish community is utterly changed in the last 5 years, where there is a civil war going on in the Jewish community. There's no
mm,
question about that, a non-violent civil war, thankfully, where growing numbers of young Jews, 18 to 35, are increasingly vocal and public against Israel. This was happening before October 7, but it's accelerated since. And so the idea that saying that critics of Jews are somehow a few random crazies in the corner is frankly bullshit. It's just not true. It
mm,
may have been true decades ago, and even if it was, I often say to people, even if I was the only Jew who opposed the occupation, what's your point?
mm.
What's your point? So what? Okay, maybe, I mean, I wasn't ever, and I'm not now, of course. Now I'm much more numbered, but and what? It's still wrong, whether I'm the only person saying it or not. The end, you know?
You want to add something, Dan?
No.
No. Okay. Fair enough. No, one of my favorite insults thrown at a friend of mine who is a Jewish New York union activist, and he was called an Otto Weininger to his face. And I was like, that's almost cerebral, that insult. Like you have to know who
Can you
Otto
translate
Weininger
that to
was.
me?
Otto Weininger was, according to Adolf Hitler, the only good Jew that ever existed, because it was a fiercely anti-Semitic Jew. He
Right.
dedicated his life to writing about the abhorrence of his own race.
Right, interesting.
And he has become a very I'm gonna say he has become an insult. Like, as I said, a cerebral insult. If a Jew in Germany criticizes Israel, he's the new Otto Weininger.
Yeah. I mean, I
Well,
almost feel like there's no comment required there, but go on, Dan.
no, just to say that it's been interesting kind of entering Antony's world when we did the Palestine laboratory, and then obviously there's a lot of supportive social media comments on the posts that we share together, but there's always, every day, there's Antony's called a capo at least once.
Yeah, yeah. It's I like this.
Should
Is
we
a really
explain what capo
tasty
is, by the way?
insult.
Should we
Sorry?
explain what capo is? I mean, people might
Yes.
know what it is in Germany, but I'll explain. Should I explain? Or
No, you do it. The more you talk
yeah, I mean,
about
a
it.
capo essentially was Jews who worked with the Nazis during the war, essentially. They were either because they thought it would save their own skin or their family, often in the camps or the ghettos, and they were called capos. And sometimes they survived the war, often they were killed in the end anyway. And it's a very common insult to Jews who support Palestine. I mean, I've been hearing it for over 20 years. I hear it, I've had it said to my face. I get it on social media all the time. I get it on emails and DMs on my socials. I mean, you kind of on one hand get used to it, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it's still just, I mean, it's deep. I mean, could it be more, could there be a more offensive insult than
Yes.
essentially saying what? I'm colluding with the Nazis because why? I'm
Yeah.
saying that the war in Gaza, for example, should end. I mean, yeah. all the occupation's wrong in the West Bank, or yeah.
But that's like the juxtaposition that they often do. Like if you say stop the genocide, they paraphrase it, you're just advocating the extermination of the Jewry.
Indeed. And I mean, the broader context here, which the film, like any film, the film is not a 10-hour Claude Lanzmann film that, which I love Claude Lanzmann's films, but, he had 10 hours to make movies, so you have to be more concise. But I mean, the broader context here, in a way, about these subjects is that, and this was a feeling before October 7, but it's certainly stronger since in many mainstream Jewish communities, that Jews are so vulnerable that we are on the precipice of another Holocaust. October 7 was evidence of that. I'm just paraphrasing that line of thinking. And therefore, as Jews, whether we're living in Israel or Germany, Australia, England, whatever, we need to be militarized and aggressive and unapologetic and hardline. Because if we're not, someone else is going. It's us or them. And that is the lesson that many Jews have taken from the Holocaust. As I said, in the delusional belief that is protecting us, when, as I said, it's to me undeniable that it's more unsafe to be a Jew in Israel than maybe anywhere else in the world. And that, frankly, has not changed in the last 2 years since October 7 and Israel's insane genocidal behavior. In fact, it's made Jews more vulnerable in Israel and globally, despite the so-called military victories. I use that term advisedly. I mean, Israel is now the most powerful military in the Middle East. That's probably undeniably true, apart from the US. And yet I would argue it does not bring any kind of long-term stability whatsoever. None. And it won't.
Yeah, right now it's stuck in this kind of forever war. And whenever whenever one of the wars ebbs down, they for sure find a reason to kick off the next iteration of another one. But let's talk a little bit about the people you talked to in the movie again, because you also talked to a lot of Jews from different political spectrums in Germany. And just what was your impression as someone who is like a guest, because you live in Australia and then in London, I think. What was your impression of Jewish life in Germany?
Dan, why don't you start?
Well, what was interesting, and again, this was something that we didn't get in the film because it would have been an 8-hour epic if we did, was that how few Jews there are in Germany. And obviously, that's a result of the Holocaust, but Deborah was telling us about, in fact, Deborah and Iris were telling us about how many Jews in Germany are German converts, and how a lot of the memory culture is enacted by non-Jews. And I have to say, when we were at the Stumblestone ceremony, and I'm busy with the director getting the shots, I just assumed everyone there was a Jew. And then it turned out there was only one person there other than Antony. And so this was relevant because it came through that so-called anti-Semitism is being perpetrated on non-Jews. And I think there's a statistic that a lot of the anti-Semitic incidents are reported by police who are not Jewish. And they are said that anti-Semitism was done to a German policeman. Now, that anti-Semitism is seeing a banner saying "From the river to the sea," so it's arguable whether it is at all. But that was something that came out that I think that I wasn't so aware of. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to go into the detail of that. But how that is represented in German life, and without having a very strong Jewish community that's confident in their Judaism, was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd spent time in Germany before, not for years, but here and there over the last 10, 15 years, and I'm not calling myself an expert about the German Jewish community, but as Dan said, relatively small. There's a sizable proportion of the Jewish community who are from Israel, who often have fled Israel for a supposedly more liberal, progressive country. Now, this was happening long before October 7, as Israel was becoming more religious, theocratic, militarized, violent, and Germany was seen as a bit of a safe haven from that. And I don't think there's been a mass exodus of Israelis out of Germany since October 7, as far as I'm aware. But that so-called safe haven, I think now would have to be questioned. Now, what I mean by that is I'm not saying that they feel physically unsafe or they're likely to be attacked physically. I don't think there's any evidence for that. But in terms of the idea that there is a more openness within Berlin or Germany, quite clearly on issues around Israel-Palestine, at least, that's simply untrue. I mean, the film shows it, and anyone who's read a newspaper or consumed media in the last 2 years in Germany will know that. As we show in the film, hundreds of events have been cancelled, artists cancelled, film cancelled. It's just, which continues. I mean, none of this is really stopped or resolved, and I would argue it probably won't for the foreseeable future, which, yes, is happening in the US as well, of course, and elsewhere. But again, in Germany, I think the German Jewish community, its main representatives, as is the case in far too many diaspora countries, is 110% behind Israel's genocide. This is the key problem that the Jewish community has. Because for the majority of the population who's not Jewish, like in every Western country except for Israel, what do they see? They see a Jewish leadership establishment backing the most horrific policies imaginable in Gaza. Nothing is too much. There are no red lines. And it's worth saying in the German polling, despite the growing support for the far right and the AfD, who are, as we said before, supposedly pro-Israel, many Germans, a majority of Germans, according to the latest polls, both want Germany to stop sending weapons to Israel, which Germany continues to do, despite Chancellor Merz saying it's stopped. It's complete nonsense. It's still continuing, and two, wants the war in Gaza to end and would like Germany to be a bit more aggressive in pushing that, which Germany does little more than issue a maybe mildly critical statement of Netanyahu and then probably picks up the phone the next day for a friendly chat. So, I mean, it's all performative bullshit, right? But the wider community sees a Jewish community supporting the most extreme, violent, racist Israeli policies. And I don't see how that does not contribute to a rise in actual anti-Semitism. Doesn't justify it? Of course it doesn't. But how can it not? And I see this in the US as well, and in Europe and the UK. And it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Yeah, I had that. A friend of mine told me this story that he was actually mistaken for an Israeli Jew. He was just a Jew. He was a German Jew, and he was attacked because they conflated him with Israel. It was not.
Yeah.
So it was an anti-Semitic happening, but not aimed at him for being Jewish, but for being like Israeli. And I think Israel always says they speak for all the Jews in the world, and Germany just amplifies that voice by using this insanely convoluted. You can't even call that definitions of anti-Semitism. But the way that Germany handles anti-Semitism and criticism at Israel, they're also always conflating Zionism, Judaism, Jewish people with Zionists and Israelis. So if people don't do their homework and they just get this message the entire time, they might have terrible ideas afterwards. So you also went to the demos and witnessed and also talked to the police a little bit. I just want to say that this was one of my personal favorite moments when you asked the policeman what the anti-Semitism on this demo is, and the guy with the gun says, there, that's all anti-Semitism. You're like, maybe not argue with the guy with the gun. So, but what was your impression there with the police?
Why don't you start with that, Dan?
I mean, to be honest, I was shocked. I've been to a lot of demos to cover them, and as a participant, and the German police were more aggressive than anywhere I've seen for a long time.
Okay.
We have marches in Britain. We've had them every 2 weeks, with easily 50, 100, quite regularly 200,000 people walk through the streets. And they don't get reported on, of course, by the British media, because this is in support of Palestine. They don't get reported on. We went to the Nakba Day march. There were, 1,000 people, I think we saw.
In Berlin, in May.
In Berlin, we went to the Nakba Day march, obviously commemorating the day in 1948, when 750,000 Palestinians were evicted from their land. And there were 1,000 people there. And there were nearly as many cops. We've said 800 in the film. We think it might be more. And the level of violence and aggression was, I mean, we were quite shocked.
What you were referring to a minute ago, we spoke to the police spokesperson who was on the scene. He's basically doing media, and we asked him, "So, can you please tell us where the anti-Semitism is?" And he says, I'm not getting his exact words, but it's pretty much this: everything you see here is anti-Semitic.
Yeah, that's no explanation at all. Just that is all anti-Semitic.
So the presence of the people, the signs, and everything. So you think, okay, firstly, I don't know if he was Jewish, and let's say he was or he wasn't. But firstly, I didn't want to get into a fight with the guy, because that wasn't the purpose of the interview. But I sort of thought, hang on a minute, I'm Jewish, and I'm telling you, I don't find a sign saying "End the war in Gaza" anti-Semitic. I'm sorry, it's just not. It's insane. I mean, the only violence, just to be clear, at that event, and from what I understand, the vast majority of events in Germany for pro-Palestine marches is coming from the cops. We saw, and we show this in the film, multiple examples, multiple police running up to lines of protesters and just start literally punching them in the face. Like, what is going on? And there's one example which people can watch in the film. I don't want to go into too much detail, but essentially the police had alleged that the protesters had attacked a policeman and he was in hospital. It was terrible. And in fact, what we found out through some amazing forensic work done by one of the participants in the film, that was all nonsense. That in fact it was not that at all. It wasn't that the protesters were, abusing the police. So, and the narrative of the protesters being unruly and dangerous is what much of the German press and the political elite say. I guess giving the impression to much of the public, it's hard to judge. I mean, you live there, so you tell me. But the sense that, well, these people are crazy. They're just sort of, violent Hamas lunatics. Of course we have to repress them. Of course we have to suppress them and stop them. I mean, that's the clear implication. If you demonize people week after week after week for years, a lot of people kind of think, oh, God, maybe they are extremists. Maybe these people are nuts. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't have them in the country, right? And that's been a similar tactic used in the UK. I've seen it done in Australia and the US and elsewhere in Europe. And which is kind of insane when you think that protests for the actual far right, which are growing in size in Germany and France and England and Australia and America, to suggest that they are less dangerous than a pro-Palestine march is insane. It's utterly insane.
But I think his comment, the policeman's comment, is I think it is one of the most important things in the film, because it kind of shows the reality of everything everyone else is saying, and that, I think, is why the police feel entitled to go and do that, because all these hate crimes, he goes on to say, he says that's why we need so many police, because of all these hate crimes that are here. So if you're a policeman and you genuinely think that this person shouting from the river to the sea is committing a crime, then you would feel entitled to go and arrest them,
to protect and serve. whatever
Indeed.
you think is in danger. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean,
we were shocked though. We didn't expect him to say that. I mean, I'm
No,
still
but I mean,
surprised.
yeah.
yes.
I'm still. Sorry, you?
I just wanted to say, I think we should also, you know, at the Nakba March, there was a lot of Palestinians, and ultimately, as they say, they are the ones that get the sharp end of this repression, and you know, it's very much visited on them. We talked to one activist who's had his house raided multiple times. He luckily he had mobile footage of the police in his bedroom. We talked to a food vlogger who, you know, shared some social media while he was back home in Palestine, and when he arrived back in Germany, the AfD had asked for him to be deported, and he was met by police who say that his whole residency is cancelled. I mean, these are absolutely shocking, and that's, as we show at the beginning, that's the reality of what's happening.
So, after your investigations and impressions, what would you say is the reason for this rather grotesque German position? I mean, it looks totally unhinged to most people from the outside. How would you explain that?
Yeah. Well, I think it is, on the one hand, unbelievably effective brainwashing for years, long before October 7, that you demonize anything to do with Palestine. I think I see that in some ways what's happening in Germany, partly the reason of its history, its inability, unwillingness to, in a way, not just learn from its own history, but to believe that blind support for Israel and cracking down on any perceived pro-Palestine support is the way that you make amends for your own crimes in World War II. But what that is doing to Germany is making the nation, I mean, we spoke to a lot of people there. I don't want to name them particularly, although they're in the film, but I don't want to specifically name them on this interview, but is that many people said if they could leave Germany, they would. They do not feel safe, both physically and politically. And that some of them said in the coming, and obviously some people don't have the means to leave, and of course we respect that, but those who do said that in the coming years they think there's a very good chance they will leave because they see a future in Germany which is unbelievably dark for them and from the wider community, to be deported, to be arrested, not for committing a crime, by the way, for supporting Palestine, for defending the rights of protest. And I think I'll just finish on this point, one of the things that's so disturbing about these cases in Germany is, with some notable exceptions, 98% of the German media, mainstream media, is utterly on board. On board, supportive, backing it, and not just the far right-wing Bild. Bild is obviously particularly maniacal and unique. Yes, indeed. But it's not just Bild. I mean, we feature Bild stories a lot in the film. The clips of their stories appear in the movie because they're quite a central paper, obviously, in your country. But it's not just them at all, actually. And again, what's the classic line? If you repeat a lie often enough, people often believe it. You know? So, yeah, I guess I think Germany is sleepwalking with its eyes open towards a much more authoritarian future unless there is radical change soon. Dan?
And I think, I mean, we put at the end, Antony made us put, how this is, you know, happening all around the world. And I think what we showed is the mechanism in Germany whereby a country, any G7 country that wants to remain in what we loosely call the West, the orbit of America, has to find a way to support Israel.
Mm.
And Britain's doing it in a slightly different way. Ours is more about accusations of terrorism. We have our own history of the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and we're in a slightly different place with that. So, and we don't have the history that Germany has. But ultimately, if you want to sit around that G7 table meeting, and that's the price. And I think different countries find different ways of doing it. And what's particularly worrying is that in Germany, it goes to such a dark past and such a deep future, which is so concerning for the future.
And none of that desire to sit at that so-called G7 table has been really changed since October 7th, even particularly since Trump has come in. Yes, there's talk about Europe being concerned about Trump and what's going to happen in Ukraine, and I'm not minimizing all those questions, fine. But ultimately, Europe, the EU, Spain is a little bit different, and there are some outliers. Belgium also is a bit more outspoken, but in general, the EU has made a decision. When I say the EU, I guess the powers that be in Brussels have made a decision, again, before Trump and since Trump, that they will swallow that pill. And it's not like they even see it as a pill that they don't want to swallow. I mean, it's not like the Europeans. I mean, this week, the head of the EU puts out a statement, a speech about measures to put a bit of pressure on Israel. I mean, it could not be weaker. Certain sanctions on some more far-right ministers, some cutting of certain trade ties between Israel and the EU, if that even gets up. The EU is Israel's biggest trading partner. And we're in a situation where Israel's committing a genocide, and the best you can do is give a speech 2 years in and say, naughty, naughty Israel, we're deeply concerned about the state of democracy in your country. Really?
That's it? Yeah.
That's it. Because the EU, and just to be clear, last year, the biggest purchaser of Israeli weapons and surveillance was Europe. The biggest, by far. And I'm almost positive when the figures come out for this year, which will be in about mid-26, it'll be quite similar. October 7 and the impact of the genocide in Gaza is having, not saying no impact, but little impact on this reality. And that's what's fueling Israel's ability to maintain this. And Germany is all in on that.
I would like to add something now from my side, because I think it's interesting that it's a mechanism that you already hinted at, but I think it's important to make that clear in this example. For example, the state of Greece always has been more or less in solidarity with Palestine. That has always been the case. Not as open and as ferocious as Ireland, for example, but that was always like the common thing, even into the right. Like they were not happy about Israel. Make that whatever you want, like the reason behind it. Might not have been a good reasoning. That doesn't matter. But now, with the crisis, etc., and the repression in Greece becoming more and more violent from the police side, they are shifting towards Zionism because it is a good excuse for crackdowns on the left in Greece. Because the left, of course, is organizing solidarity events with Gaza, with the Middle East, stuff like that, anti-Zionist rallies, whatever you may like. Now they have a perfect reason to put a crackdown on them. And they literally, a friend of mine is a lawyer in Greece, and she said they literally told her that Germany is the role model here. How to treat the left.
Well, it's funny you say that. When I say funny, not ha-ha funny, but
No.
disturbing. That someone on Twitter today said that it's interesting after obviously Dan and I made the Palestine Laboratory film earlier this year, which is based on my book of the same name, is that they were saying basically what you just said, which is Germany has become a different kind of laboratory in relation to exactly what you just said. Yeah, I mean, what can I say about that apart from shame Germany and shame Greece for that matter?
and it's potentially not a surprise. It's in Antony's book and in our film. Greece is a big purchaser of Israeli weapons. And is also running a laboratory, not just with Israeli technology, with American and European technology on surveilling migrants.
Yes, which we show in the film, by the way. People should watch the Palestine laboratory, because we go to Samos on the Greek islands and show that a lot of the tech that's being used to surveil migrants is not all of it, as Dan said, but a lot of it is Israeli. Yeah.
It's publicly available on Al Jazeera as well?
It's on YouTube. People Google Palestine Laboratory, YouTube, or Al Jazeera. There's 2 parts.
Okay.
Yeah, so easily found, yes.
Promise to watch that as soon as possible. Really like the other one, so looking forward to it. Let's maybe wrap this up a little bit.
Yeah.
What are the opportunities for change of this situation you see for Germany or other countries that are going into this unconditional support mode?
Well, I guess I'd say a few things on that briefly. Is that there is, what has become very clear, particularly this year, is that there is a growing, profound disconnect between the public and our political and media elites on Palestine, including in Germany. As I said before, German polls have showed for quite a while, in fact, that many Germans oppose what Israel is doing, despite the growing support of the far right in Germany. Both can be true, and want weapons to stop being sent to Israel from Germany. Now, that is not being represented particularly by many in the political or media space. Yet there are some on the German left, I'd say far left politically, who clearly do share those views, but not, I mean, as you said before, when the German Greens were in power, they were terrible on, frankly, most issues. So they're not much help. I mean, obviously, because there's a Green Party in Australia who are very different on this issue, and in fact, they're very, very good on it. So I guess it depends where the Greens are, which country. But I think the hope in some ways is finding a way, and this is what I get questioned all the time, how does this change? And the challenge that many of us who talk about this issue is, how do you almost get the huge public support that exists for Palestine, which was the case before October 7, but it's got much stronger since, and find a way to politicize that, to take that into political office or political power beyond a handful of politicians who may well share those views, or the media for that matter. And I think it's finally explains that although the decline of the mainstream media has been around for the last 10, 15 years, what I see, particularly in the last few years, is an acceleration of those trends, that so many, particularly younger people, are so disillusioned with what they're not being told about this issue in BBC, Guardian, New York Times, whatever it may be. And those organizations still have a massive readership and viewership. That won't change overnight. But what is also happening is there's a huge so-called alternative press, for want of a better expression. It's huge and it's growing, and that's not going to change. And Gaza is not the only reason for that, but it's a massive factor. And I welcome that, because that's utterly necessary. If we're not going to be told reliable, accurate information at all in those more mainstream outlets, people are going to find it elsewhere. I mean, just finally on this point, it's worth saying that when there was an attempt to literally ban TikTok in the US, which was already going to be happening last year before Trump came in, although the reason given publicly was, well, we're concerned about Chinese infiltration, it was said by some more honest American politicians, what they were worried about was too many young Americans supported Palestine. That was worrying to them because they were seeing all these horrible images on TikTok. It was literally stated that way by Mitt Romney, by the head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt. So this, now, suffice to say, TikTok is still around because Trump sees an advantage in keeping it open. That's a separate conversation. But the attempt to shut it down had a lot to do with Palestine. That is seen as the so-called threat. And if you want to add something to that, Dan, or just in general?
I mean, while we were there, and we're to some extent clutching at straws here, but there are seeds. The Die Linke adopted the Jerusalem definition of anti-Semitism, which doesn't equate it with Zionism, as opposed to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, which in all the people that we were talking to was seen as a great thing, because that then makes them the only party in Germany that doesn't equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So I don't know if that's still hopeful, but I think it's, as Antony's saying, I think certainly in this country, in Britain, the the outrageousness of what's happening in Gaza has galvanized hundreds of thousands of millions of people, and to the extent that there's rumblings of a new party forming, the fact that there were regularly hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets, it's supporting Palestine, has a lot to do with the energy that is there. And so I think, I don't know if anything's going to happen politically in time. Clearly not, because so many people will have died in Palestine. But it is motivating people, I think, to think about politics and to start new things around the world. So I think that's a glimmer.
Thank you for that. So, it has been a great pleasure having the two of you on this show. I sincerely extend the invitation. Please come again and talk about the other documentation, Israel's laboratory in Palestine, I think.
Palestine Laboratory.
Palestine Laboratory, sorry. I will watch that, promised. I will stick to my promise. I urge everyone who is a viewer of this channel, please go and watch both these movies, Palestine Laboratory and the one that we're talking about in this interview, Germany's Israel Obsession. Thank you so much for the insight. Take care, be well, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was great to chat with you.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht, das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.